Welcome to the Tow Club Industry Podcast. My name is Art, co-founder at Tow Club. Appreciate you all tuning in. So today I have a topic that is of very much interest to me personally, because of where I do business in the San Francisco Bay Area, and because our topic today, which is the adoption of electric vehicles. Um, Electric vehicles were sort of born in my backyard, so to speak. As many of you know, Tesla started here in Northern California and has made quite the mark on the automotive industry in general. Today, I'll be talking a little bit about, how I think some of the key pieces of information will affect the towing industry and what I believe towers should be considering as it relates to this incoming adoption of electric vehicles. Um, as I mentioned, much of this electric vehicle adoption started here. I'd like to start off with some statistics, mainly because much of the discussions surrounding electric vehicles, oftentimes, particularly as it relates to the automotive industry in general, are very sort of skeptical in nature. People are weary of what the adoption is going to mean. They're weary of the vehicles themselves. There doesn't seem to be a lot of confidence in what I would say the legacy part of the automotive industry as it relates to electric vehicles. So I'll start with a few stats. First thing is 19% of new vehicles sold globally are electric vehicles. And if you think about that, that's roughly 1 in 5. That's quite a bit. I do happen to know that Asia and Europe are much higher than that, but globally we're at 19%. Domestically speaking, as of Q3 2023, we are at 8% of new domestic vehicles being sold are electric. So that is kind of important in some respects. That's probably more than some other countries, but less than Europe and Asia. Um, a lot of the automotive analysts, experts, former engineers, sort of like the vehicle commentators and journalists, are expecting that we'll see the tipping point, meaning greater than 50% of new cars sold being electric, should happen around 2030. Some are saying maybe 2028, some are saying 2032. It's sort of, in some respects, speculation at this point, but that's what the anticipation is. Another really important statistic is that currently 45 states in the United States are offering really significant electric vehicle purchase incentives. And as far as the reporting that's out there now in terms of statements made by Legacy Automotive domestically and coming out of Japan, most of the OEMs are indicating that by 2030, some a little bit before, some a little bit after, are going to be only selling electric vehicles. So if you stop and think about some of this information for a second, this is, in many respects, painting a picture that I think should not be dismissed. I think us in the industry should be paying very, very close attention, uh, on this particular fact. So, what does that mean for us specifically? I know a lot of people that are watching, particularly those that are somewhat on the skeptical side of this proliferation of electric vehicles, may be indicating that politics are a component of this, and that certainly is the case. Although they are very complex in nature, and there has been some sort of dubious facts in the past as it relates to some of the things that have compelled states, the federal government, etc., from moving in this direction. However, there is a significant environmental advantage. I don't want to discount that. As far as what it means for towers, I want to talk a little bit about the vehicles themselves. So, hey, thanks again for watching. I just wanted to interrupt this podcast to let you know about something we're really excited about, and that's Tow Club version 3.0. Our engineering team is really working their asses off on this product. We're hoping to introduce it at the end of the year. We might be off by a few weeks, but we're working really hard. And if you have any questions or are interested in a demonstration, please reach out to us and we will schedule that for you. Thanks again. So, in the course of our operations, some of the things that I believe concerning electric vehicles that could affect the way we do things are, first thing is that many electric vehicles have two motors, and I'll translate that. So you're going to see more all-wheel drive vehicles. So what does that mean for towers? Probably an increase in the use of wheel dollies. Probably an increase in towers saying, I just want to send a flatbed after that. I don't have dollies available at the moment. So towers are going to have to be aware of that fact. I know one thing that has been very helpful with the software engineers in Tow Club. Hey, Michael. One of the things that's been very helpful in talking to the software engineers about this is how do towers get good information about the vehicle? So some of the incoming features that we are establishing at Tow Club involve the use of hyperlinks in the vehicles when you decode the VIN that would allow towers to quickly identify, hey, what is the drivetrain of this vehicle? What information can I get? Can I get how heavy the car is, etc.? We'll get back to weight here in a minute. So that's been very helpful. But most electric, or many, I should say, electric vehicles have all-wheel drive systems, so there has to be considerations for that. Now, another fact about electric vehicles, generally, as compared to a gasoline vehicle counterpart, anywhere from 5 to 20% heavier. It just depends on the class of vehicle. I personally drive an electric pickup truck, and my truck, which is a Rivian R1T, weighs about 7,100 pounds. So that's not light by any means. It's roughly 15% heavier than I think a comparable crew cab, gasoline-powered light-duty pickup. Some other facts that I think are important and they are going to affect, in my opinion, road service operations are these vehicles are very connected. In other words, most electric vehicles, if not all, but I believe most, have a hotspot in them. This enables the manufacturer to diagnose the vehicle and any problems, collect driving data from their server, as opposed to needing the vehicle physically to gain information, to troubleshoot, to do diagnostics. So there's that. That means also that the vehicles will update themselves on a schedule or randomly. I think my truck about once a month gets a software update. I can't use it for a few minutes a month as a result. So this is going to affect those that have service bays because there's going to be potentially some disruptions until we can, or until I should say the auto repair industry figures out how to meet the demands of these vehicles outside of warranty. This also means that many of these vehicles, I should say, don't have the traditional key. And unlocking these vehicles is, I don't want to say impossible, but it's certainly going to be a lot more difficult and perhaps different than many of the vehicles currently on the road. So there's going to be perhaps a disruption in the amount of service calls as it relates to unlocks and stuff like that. There's going to be less road service options overall, and I'm going to get, we're going to talk about some opportunities here in a minute. I know that some of you are watching this and saying, hey, what the hell is in this for me? But I think that the conclusion will show that the opportunities that are going to be present may, in some cases, for many towers, outweigh some of the losses that could be sustained as a result of an en masse electric vehicle adoption. So, other opportunities. So one opportunity that I've noticed that I've already seen some towers, particularly those in metropolitan areas where there's a saturation, I should say, of electric vehicles. I believe, I could be mistaken here, but I believe in the San Francisco Bay Area, we already have reached a tipping point in terms of electric vehicles. We are above 50% of new vehicle sales being electric. That could be different by county, but I believe we are hovering around that mark now. So some towers in my area specifically, and a few other markets in the United States, metropolitan areas, have already adopted the use of mobile electric vehicle charge stations that have been fitted to like a emergency road service van. In other words, many towers already have vehicles that they dedicate to road service calls. Many of these vehicles can be upfitted with a mobile emergency road service charger, in which you can charge for a road service. You go out there, you charge their battery for 20, 30 minutes, give them 10, 15 miles of range, enough to get to a DC fast charger and get topped off and resume their journey. This is going to create a lot of opportunities for towers. And I really think towers should be looking into these options, particularly towers that are operating in areas with high EV adoption rates. Um, I think it's relatively well known that it's mostly major metro areas that currently have high electric vehicle adoption rates. So I anticipate towers in those regions will heed that, if they haven't already thought of that, and determine what they can do to be a provider for that type of service. The other thing that's interesting about most electric vehicles, I don't want to say all, but I do happen to know Teslas exclusively don't have spare tires. Now, during the warranty process, Tesla has engaged with many towers, some of you may be watching here, for the purposes of bringing out a spare rim and tire and getting these vehicles back on the road. As it relates to vehicles coming out of warranty, there could be opportunity for towers here to take this capability on for themselves and provide common spare wheels and tires for customers needing roadside assistance. They hit a pothole, they get a flat, etc. Again, something for towers to think about, and there's two options there that might mitigate some of the losses otherwise, sustained by the fact that these cars are inherently different. So I think, two options there. And I think what you're going to see is the prices for providing these services coming down considerably. I did a search, and there's plenty of links. I want to remind everyone in the video description. I recently did a search, and there was more than a dozen companies offering a mobile charging apparatus that could be utilized by our industry for purposes of helping stranded electric vehicle owners. I want to get and talk a little bit about, well, maybe a little bit more than a little, about the infrastructure for electric vehicles and how this ties into towers. Because when we talk about opportunities, it's easy to think about just the vehicles themselves, but there's a whole other component to electric vehicle adoption, and that's the infrastructure. So the first thing that comes to mind, or the obvious thing, is charging stations. And I'm going to presume, because I've been told this by many in the industry and online comments, which it can be pretty interesting to follow. So if you haven't yet taken a look at online threads concerning the towing industry, electric vehicles, the issues that we are having servicing some of these vehicles, etc., one thing people often talk about is the infrastructure. The claim that's made is, well, the infrastructure is not there yet, it's not ready. And there is some credibility to that argument, but I want to describe the infrastructure a little bit so that some of us can understand what opportunities could be there as it relates to infrastructure. So there are basically three levels of charging speed for electric vehicles. I'll break them down really quickly. There's level 1, which is your 110 volt standard residential outlet. That's a very, very slow way to charge an electric vehicle. I believe in most vehicles, that'll give you 3 to 5 driving miles per hour of charge. So it's sort of it's an option that some people use if they're driving very little and they just want to kind of trickle charge their car. It's also an option that is mainly relegated to single family homes for obvious reasons, because generally speaking, in high and medium density housing, it's hard to have your own plug. Level 2 charging is 240 volt, and that's up to 100 amps or so. Generally speaking, you're not going to see a circuit greater than that. And that will charge a vehicle from speeds anywhere from 20 to 60 driving miles per hour of charge. Again, mostly single family homes. You're not going to see level 2 so much in other areas, although there is some areas like hotels where you see it. It's starting to creep into high density apartments, condominiums. There are some companies now that are providing solutions for residential buildings that are high density. There's some challenges there because retrofitting and upgrading their electrical systems to accommodate this are a little bit of a challenge. However, the reason I bring those two levels of charging speed up is this. As you see more of these, it becomes that much more critical for whoever is in charge of that place where you plug in. Obviously, it's a single family home. It's your place. You can use that outlet how you wish. But if you are plugging into a hotel, if you are plugging into an apartment complex, a condo complex, a shopping center, and it's level 2, that's slower than level 3, and we'll get to level 3 momentarily. However, that means that those property managers have to enforce the use of that stall so it doesn't get abused, so as to make that stall available for the next person that could be needing it. For the towers that do private property towing, this presents an opportunity for enforcement that should be considered. As more shopping centers and housing areas include these types of chargers, there's going to be opportunities for those of you that enforce parking. DC fast charging is another name for level 3 charging, and this involves heavy power, 400 plus amps, much higher voltage, and much higher rates of charge to the tune of anywhere from 100 to 500 kilowatt hours per hour in speed. So I'll translate that a little bit. If you have, let's say, a vehicle with a 80, 90 kilowatt battery, and I'm talking about like a Model 3 or maybe a Model S Tesla, and there's many other vehicles with batteries in that size range, you are going to arrive at a DC fast charger with a 20, 30% state of charge, and you're going to leave with an 85, 90% state of charge anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how quickly the station can provide power and how quickly your onboard vehicle charger can distribute that power. Now, those chargers get abused probably the most, which is based on my experience. As some of you know, my towing company, which is located in San Jose, exclusively does private property towing. So we have use cases for many years now with property managers having issues. So I feel compelled to share some of this information with you guys as it relates to enforcing some of these stalls. DC fast chargers are not only an opportunity for those of you that are doing private property towing, but there's another opportunity available as it relates to DC fast chargers, and that is some towers that I happen to know have locations on major interstates. And as a result of legislation that was recently passed by the federal government, some of you will be able to have these chargers installed on your property and generate a revenue share from the companies operating those chargers. So there could be opportunities for those of you that are on routes, and there are several places where you can go and register your property for consideration of these chargers, and there's no expense out of your pocket. Definitely something you should consider. There's going to be some ancillary benefits to having these chargers on your property, in addition to the obvious need where people need to charge their vehicles, and of course, in addition to the revenue, which would be welcome. I imagine most of you are thinking of those possibilities. So we've talked about a few things. Now I want to talk about one of the more obvious things, which is a very contentious issue. And there's a recent emergence of class 3 and 8 electric trucks. So what am I talking about here? We are knocking on the door to see electric tow trucks. That's just the bottom line. And I know many of you are probably watching this saying, Art's out of his mind. I'm never going to do that. It's not going to work. There's a host of other reasons, and we'll get to some of those momentarily. However, and I'm going to use my use case in particular as an example. Many of the companies that are providing these chassis are publishing their driving ranges at full gross weight. So simply translated, if you have a class 5 truck, let's say it's GVW 19 or 20,000 pounds, many manufacturers are saying, hey, we've got this chassis available. It's 19 or 20,000 GVW, and it's got a driving range of, let's say, 180 or 200 miles at gross weight. Many of you have also said, and I've been reading this, that, hey, people aren't getting their stated range. That much is very true. Driving habits certainly play a role in that. However, for the metropolitan tower, and I'll just speak on my use case in particular, some of these trucks could be very, very effective. In my use case, I work in a large city, San Jose, California. I only cover about a 10 air mile radius or so. We don't do out of town transport. We're a parking enforcement company. So for my use case, one thing that is the benefit of having good software and good software partners and integrations, I've been able to determine that the average truck in my fleet travels 108 miles per shift. Now, I know many of you are probably scoffing at that, saying, oh, well, that'll never work. I don't do that. Well, I'm here to tell you that there are a lot of towers with use cases similar to mine. I don't know how much of the industry that makes up, and I'm going to imagine that most of these towers are metropolitan or operating in saturated markets, big population density. I'm talking NYC, Miami, DFW, Chicago, San Francisco Bay Area, Southern California, etc. So that being said, many of the incoming trucks coming onto the market could be very useful to companies like ours. So when you think about how to make everything work, these are chassis. Now we're talking about Hey Miller Industries, Hey Jerdan, and forgive me for leaving out the others, but there's a host of others. And I'm talking about companies that make our towing equipment. What steps are they taking, and what steps is our industry taking to compel the manufacturers to work with the incoming chassis manufacturers and say, how do we make the hydraulics work? Because I know that's on everybody's mind. And I am working with a few companies right now, and it appears that there are solutions to make that work. We are in the very early stages, and I'd love to do a follow-up episode and share my findings with everybody as more information becomes available. But thinking about how to make everything work. So the average tower is going to ask, as they should, hey, what kind of support am I going to get? Because when I say manufacturers and incoming class 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 trucks, I'm not talking about General Motors. I'm not talking about Ford. These are startups. And the legacy automotive manufacturers have been, in terms of passenger cars, and now it's seemingly showing true for medium duty and heavy duty commercial trucks, they have been slow to roll out options. It remains to be seen how that's going to affect them in the long run. I'm concerned for some of the major manufacturers because I think that the speed in which they are coming out with products to suit our needs is relatively slow. And I think the startups are going to have some advantages and some opportunities to get a slice of the market. That being said, towers are going to ask about support. That's a big concern. So if you're buying a chassis from a small manufacturer, you need to be inquiring how you're going to get support, what the warranty is, etc. But I've looked into this a little bit, and I think most towers, if they research it carefully, they will find that, despite the concerns about support, smaller manufacturers, etc., the benefits are relatively good. We're talking about less maintenance. We're talking about 90% less moving parts. We're talking about an increased reliability. And mind you, and I want to be upfront with everybody here, this is a use case from the passenger vehicle industry. So I'm relatively speculative that it's going to carry over into the 3 to 8 truck market. The early reports are that it has. There's already quite a few Class 8 and 7 semi-tractors operating in fleets in Northern California. So I think what's playing out with passenger cars is going to play out with trucks as well. Obviously remains to be seen. I'm open to the people that are very skeptical. I think that there is some merit to some of their arguments. I want to leave you with one other thing that's very important as it relates to electric tow trucks and the possibilities. There are enormous government tax incentives for implementing an electric truck in your fleet. And by enormous, I'm talking $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 in some cases, We've included a bunch of links in the video description to some of these incentives. Again, from what I know thus far, and if I'm proven wrong, I'll be happy to come on and explain to everybody how I was wrong. But from what I've looked into thus far, these incentives really make this an attractive proposition, if all the other factors are met, of course. I know there's a lot of ifs there. So again, something to think about. You should look into the incentives. You should talk to your accountant, your CPA, whoever you talk to in regards to financial decisions, because there could be some very positive benefits as a result of those incentives alone, if nothing else. All right, this is the most fun part. And the most fun part of this discussion, if you're still awake, let's talk a little bit about dispelling electric vehicle myths, because I referenced this a little bit earlier. There's a tremendous amount of misinformation circulating about electric vehicles. Most of the engineering for electric vehicles, in terms of most of the vehicles that are on the road domestically, at least, is happening right here. Now, I'd love to say I have information that you guys don't, but that's not the case. I have access to the same information as everybody else. However, as a result of doing business here, I have seen many more of these vehicles on the road. And I personally and my family have logged about 370,000 miles on electric vehicles over the course of 8 years now. So I can attest to some of this firsthand. However, let's talk a little bit about some of the myths that are circulating online. Fires. We did a really nice episode with some people from Firebox a few months back, and it was a great episode. It provided a great deal of information surrounding a fire containment device that you would have in your storage lot in the event that you towed an electric vehicle that was involved in an accident, because certainly it increases the likelihood that the vehicle is going to catch fire. That much is true. So there certainly is a risk of fire. However, when you look at the average fire per mile driven for an electric vehicle compared to a gas vehicle, you'll find that electric vehicles catch fire less. Now, there are going to be arguments made about, well, gas vehicles only catch fire in these scenarios, and electric vehicle fires are unpredictable, et cetera, et cetera. Some of that is accurate, although not all of it. So there is some room to debate this. However, as it stands, electric vehicles just burn less often. All of the context notwithstanding, they statistically speaking, they burn less often. So there's a couple of mitigating factors, though, to the fires. And the first one is, apart from the fact that they burn less, the second important factor to consider here is the evolution of battery chemistry. In our last episode with Firebox, we touched on this a little bit, where we were talking with the engineer for the device about how battery chemistries are evolving. So right now, one of the more popular battery chemistries is still lithium ion, and this is commonly referred to, or the common chemistry is referred to as NMC, nickel, manganese, and cobalt. This is a very common battery chemistry, very common lithium-ion battery chemistry. And what we have emerging now in the last 2 to 3 years, so to speak, is something called lithium iron phosphate, which is commonly referred to as LFP. And lithium iron phosphate batteries have a much, I think by a factor of 80 or 90% from what we've been able to determine thus far, chance of catching fire. So incoming chemistries are going to, in addition to solid state chemistry, which is coming soon, they are going to mitigate a lot of the fire risks associated with the common battery chemistries. Another myth, this is a really fun one, and this myth in particular has a lot of correlation to like all caps angry responses online. Hopefully some of you guys get the humor and read between the lines on that. And that's battery life and recycling. I'm going to combine two myths into one here. First thing that's very important. This is something that is touched on a lot online. Hey, the batteries, the life is poor, and there's a lot of bad information out there. The average electric vehicle battery lasts 10 to 20 years and roughly 200 to 300,000 miles. A little bit of context on that. We are talking about a usable battery, 2 to 300,000 miles. Batteries do degrade. So if your battery from new, if you go to 100,000 miles, there's going to be what's called degradation. And this is just a shrinkage of the capacity, essentially. The amount of charges, the discharging and recharging of the battery over time contributes to this degradation. And I'll just give an anecdote here. I have a Tesla Model 3 that is 4 years old now, that has roughly 100,000 miles. And because the vehicles are so well connected, you can actually measure the degradation based on the available capacity. So right now, that vehicle, which has, I believe, 99,000 miles, has suffered a roughly 5.5% degradation. So when you consider that, that's not bad. When you look at a gasoline vehicle, the piston rings are going to wear, you're going to get blow by. So there are some correlations there in terms of wear, but 200,000 to 300,000 mile lifespan for electric vehicle batteries are very common, and they will typically do that with less than 25 or 30% degradation. There are obviously outliers. There are obviously cases in which it's been much worse. There are obviously cases which I read about every day, which oftentimes, contribute to my optimism surrounding electric vehicles. But there are cases in which 300,000 miles and they only suffer a 4% degradation, much of which can be mitigated with how you treat your battery. You don't run it all the way low. You don't charge it to 100%. And we can get into some of that in the future. But battery care is a large factor in determining degradation. A little bit on recycling. Again, I'm only talking in terms of online comments here, but one of the myths that you see circulated online is, oh, they're bad for the environment. What are you going to do with the battery? Are you going to throw it in the ocean? No, you're not going to throw it in the ocean, and please don't. There are several outfits now that recycle these batteries and repurpose the precious metals to make new batteries. This is a positive thing. We've included, again, some links in the video description on a few of these companies. Me, myself, personally, I'm interested in possibly investing in companies like that because I think they're going to meet a need for our society, even apart from transportation, because clearly batteries aren't everything. Another myth, the cars are too expensive. You get this one a lot. This one has some traction. They are, in some cases, expensive. The question becomes, is how are you evaluating expense? And I know it's mostly, or I should say, I know there are many owners watching here. And as owners of towing companies, oftentimes when we look at a truck, we erroneously look at the upfront cost as opposed to the total cost of ownership over 5 years. You will find that if you look at electric vehicles that way, and again, we've included some links in the video description that outline some of this, you will find anywhere from a 20 to 60% reduced cost of ownership for an electric vehicle. This encompasses charging it. This encompasses the maintenance. This encompasses, for example, brakes, which if you look at a passenger vehicle, the brakes on an electric vehicle, well, I'll share my experience with you. My Tesla Model 3, nearly 100,000 miles, has 85% left on its brake pads. And that's because you generally one-pedal drive these cars, and regenerative braking means that you're using the brakes hardly ever. So obviously many reduced maintenance costs. So again, you look at your total cost of ownership, it has proven, at least in the passenger car segment, to be much, much less. Another, and I'm not going to call this one a myth, but another common complaint. I'm going to refer to this one as a complaint because there is some merit to this complaint, and that's cold weather performance. I am going to concede, me being an advocate of electric vehicles, and maybe a little bit of a homer as well, because they were essentially born in our backyard here. I'm going to concede that cold weather performance leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of battery performance. It tends to dramatically, in some cases by 40%, reduce range, maybe more, and also towing. You will find that towing with electric vehicles can dramatically reduce range depending on the aerodynamics of what you're pulling. And those of you that have electric vehicles in cold weather areas have oftentimes lodged complaints and said, hey, my vehicle's supposed to drive 300 miles. When the weather's good, I regularly get 250, 270. I'm happy with that. But when it's cold, I'm getting half. And that much is somewhat accurate. And there are some caveats. The first thing is that, we talked a little bit about battery chemistry, earlier. Battery chemistry, again, rapidly evolving. And some of the more recent chemistries coming onto the market are battery chemistries and battery management systems. I want to be clear on that because the management systems and the chemistries play a role in how the batteries perform, regardless of weather, etc. So some of these emerging technologies in battery management, battery thermal management, and performance of the chemistry in the batteries, the metals in the batteries, I should say, the combination of metals, as it relates to cold weather, are rapidly and dramatically improving. So there's that. Another thing, and this is not going to satisfy some of you, is, this cold weather performance really only rears its ugly head in the most extreme cold weather climates, which does not affect the majority of the country. It sort of affects a smaller portion of the country, if you will. Although we do plan on following up some of this information, and I'd like to, next year come back and talk about, hey, I've got an electric tow truck. Here are my results. This other tower has these electric tow trucks. Here are these results of this tower. So I'm very excited to do an update episode as more information comes in. Some of this information is still new. Some of these technologies are still emerging. I don't anticipate anybody watching here to take my word, in its entirety. So I would love to share some results with those of you that are watching very soon. I'm very excited to share some results. In closing, knowing all of what I've discussed, please ask yourself what changes you plan to make, not based on what I say. What I say in many respects may affect or may not affect what you plan to do. But what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about, hey, I want to provide charging service? Are you thinking about, hey, I do private property towing, so I would like to learn more about electric vehicles so that I can help my clients, the property managers, understand what their obligations are, understand how some of these areas need to be marked, and so that you can provide a service for that. What information are you going to be considering as it relates to the emergence of class 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 trucks coming on the market? What are you thinking about? If you're not thinking about it, I suggest that you do, because I think dismissing emerging technology is not going to give you the best chance to sustain your businesses. Again, I'll leave you with this. If you don't care to know, don't tow. Thanks again for watching.